One always hopes for smooth sailing, but it doesn't always happen. Unfortunately, we get the rough weather. Sometimes that comes in a form of conflict in the stakeholder community. We're now going to talk a little bit about how to manage conflict constructively. Take these rough seas and calm them down a wee bit. Yeah, there's very few people I meet that like conflict. We somehow adapt to it. We do the best we can. People shy away from the turmoil and rough seas conflict stirs up. In this next lesson, we're going to look at managing conflict. See if we can take these rough seas, calm them down a wee bit. I'd like you to read the section on conflict before watching the rest of this video. Here we are on Railay Beach in South Thailand. Looks very tranquil, very peaceful, and indeed it is. Perhaps an appropriate spot for our discussion on conflict and managing conflict constructively. I've been involved in conflict resolution for many years. In another life, I'm a mediator. I'm employed to mediate conflicts between people that are suing each other in court. I also volunteer in a community mediation where neighbors perhaps are in disagreement with each other. Important aspect there, of course, is that after they resolve their dispute, they still have to communicate with each other. They still live beside each other. I'm going to suggest that as a business architect, the conflict that you encounter and the need to continue communication throughout the conflict is indeed closer to a community mediation. In 2000, I was privileged to be part of a mediation. When we think about managing conflict, and really what you feel when you go into a negotiation. Many people tell me that they feel nervous, they feel anxious, they feel uptight, because they fear, I believe, conflict situation and a competitive negotiation. Someone's out to get them. They want to make sure they win. Got to make sure that they don't lose. We're going to look at collaborative negotiation. It goes well beyond the time when you can say, oh, well, let's just go out and have a drink and resolve our differences. Well, here's a nice, tranquil spot for us to continue our discussion around conflict. If you've done the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument, you'll see that it tells us a lot about the way that we personally approach conflict. If we understand how we personally approach conflict, it'll give us some insight in how to manage conflict in the stakeholder community. Now, some of us grew up in homes where the dinnertime entertainment was a debate. Others grew up in homes where you wouldn't dare raise your voice. We learn that as we grow, and then when we get into the workforce, we also learn what works for us, what style is appropriate for us. So what's the best style to have? Is it assertive, avoiding, compromise, accommodating, or collaborating? Correct answer? It depends. Each of the styles have their own use and appropriate use. What we want to guard against, and what the Thomas Kilmann instrument is useful for, is determining when we overuse one or more of the conflict styles. It might be very appropriate to use the assertive style if it's a life and death situation, or it's an emergency, or the safety of your family is involved, or a human rights issue, that would be very appropriate. When's it okay to accommodate? Well, when you accommodate, you're really being cooperative, you're really maintaining the relationship, but what you give up is the goal, and sometimes the goal of your own organization. When's it appropriate to accommodate? When the goal isn't important to you, but it is important to the other person, and when the relationship is vitally important. I always say that's when mother-in-law invites you over for dinner. You know you have to go sooner or later, and you certainly don't want to mess up that relationship. The avoider avoids conflict. Either they've learned that when they get into a conflict situation, they lose, and so they avoid it. They run away from conflict. There's another kind of avoider, if you scored high on avoiding, and that's the person who temporarily avoids the conflict, takes a step back, and that gives them time to think about which one of the other styles would be most appropriate. The compromiser, that's the guy that splits the difference, believes that the right answer is halfway between any two points. When's that appropriate? Well, it's appropriate if you have many decisions to make, as you do in any given business day. There are lots of decisions to make, and sometimes they're not vitally important. I can't make the meeting on Friday. Can we make it Thursday afternoon? A negotiation occurs there, and we often split the difference. We do it because it's efficient. Collaboration, that's important when both the goal and the relationship are important. And throughout this lesson, we're going to strive to be collaborators. Note that a collaborator is just as goal-oriented as is the assertive person. And the collaborator is just as interested in maintaining the relationship as the accommodator is. The collaborator believes the way to win is to maintain and to grow that relationship. The way to be successful, that we could both win, is through having that relationship. It's not going to be done through power or rights or anything else but an interest-based solution. Now I'd like you to join me in Raleigh, North Carolina in the United States for a discussion about power, rights, and interest-based solutions.